Hi, I'm Spencer Brown, and I'm getting ready to do Module 3, which is the special education interviews. So, the first question that we discussed with my participants were legal procedures, including child find. And you'll see the special education teacher also went into the conversation about incidental benefit. But the principal first just talked about how crucial, in terms of the legalities, specifically um, around qualifying for special education. You wanted to talk about the importance of a strong MTSS and how that can really streamline a lot of facets in terms of determining whether a student is prepared to needs to be evaluated for special education. And then he touched a little bit on incidental benefit, talking about utilizing staff appropriately to reach all students, and in regards to child find, how MTSS can be used to do that. The special education teacher talked about similar pieces, understanding the legal capabilities of all staff. Sometimes staff aren't utilized as effectively or as efficiently as possible. But then he also wanted to make sure that as a special education teacher, a big part of your role is to ensure that those who need specialized instruction are receiving that. And so if you're going down the road of incidental benefit, you have to be very careful that what you're providing, um, the services that you're to be providing for the IEP are not hindered in any way by a more of a group setting. The paraprofessional, and you'll see this kind of throughout, talked about just understanding their role. So as a paraprofessional, you don't necessarily have that formal training on some of those legalities, and so making sure that they receive that so that they understand what their capabilities and expectations are. The most challenging facet of the job when working with special education students, the principal talked a lot about instilling confidence within those struggling students. Oftentimes, school is not a fun place to be if you're a struggling learner, and so a principal can be someone that the child wants to avoid at all costs. And so, creating this relationship of trust and confidence building can go a long ways for that student. He also talked about making sure you understand the student's specific disability. Um, that helps you understand when it's appropriate to how the teachable moment will be appropriate to approach, and making sure that you just understand what's going to help that student the most in the moment. Special education teacher talked about balancing the teaching responsibilities with other roles. So, in particular, this special education teacher is had some regular education roles as well, and so he just had a lot of different roles that he's trying to balance as that special education teacher. The paraprofessional really just talked about the lack of formal training, and so they're kind of thrown into this community with lots of education jargon and legal ramifications and education pedagogy is what she touched on. And so sometimes it can feel difficult to feel like you belong, or like you know exactly, or be confident in your role there at the school. The most rewarding facet when working with special education students with an IEP, the principal said seeing that struggling students succeed is by far the most rewarding piece, and building that trusting culture was just something that he really valued. Um, the special education teacher had a similar thread when he said the best part is exiting a student from special education. Showing the kids their own growth was huge, and he just said that they just eat it up, and that really builds confidence for them. And then I thought the last one was particularly interesting. He talked about how, as a special education teacher, you have the opportunity to influence this student to have greater growth than any typical achievement rate. And so he kind of said it like, if you're doing your job well, you get to see these struggling students grow at a faster pace than students in a general education setting. And then the paraprofessional, so the most rewarding facet is simply that relationship with that student. And then, although it's a challenge sometimes to be a part of a system that you maybe weren't formally trained in, that was also a very rewarding aspect for this paraprofessional, because she said you get to be a part of something greater, than yourself, and there's lots of learning involved. And so while sometimes you feel a little inadequate right out of the gate, you learn so much, and that's really rewarding. Advice on supervision of special education. The principal talked about there needs to be really strong collaboration between special education and general education. He said that most effective instruction comes when they are working together in the most effective way, but he gave an example of a couple times where he's had students ask to be in the special education teacher's class, not realizing that it was a special education teacher, because they were just so well intertwined in the instruction and in supporting students. And so that was just a great example of when all staff is on the same page and working well together in a professional manner. Clearly defining the paraprofessional's role. He talked about how sometimes paras he's ran into the issue where paraprofessionals didn't understand their role. And so he's had to talk with them about they're expected to learn what's being taught so that they can assist the student with that. And they're expected to really be helping across the room, not just necessarily be a babysitter to the student that they're working with. And then the last part he said is as a administrator, you want to have a large hand in scheduling IEPs. He's seen it where the special education teacher takes care of that, and then the principal is not available. And in his opinion, that's just unacceptable. The special education teacher said that the biggest piece is making sure that you have open communication between all levels. So being sure that you've set up supports for general education, special education to speak with each other seamlessly and really work well together in a professional setting. The paraprofessional, interestingly enough, kind of echoed what the principal said and just said, I need to know my role, have high expectations of me, because I'm not here to just babysit kids. I am here to create student success and learning. So define my role and have high expectations for me. In terms of communication with parents, across the board, everybody just talked about how important this is. But I really found what the principal said to be really interesting. He said, listen to their perspective and listen to their fears. We're talking about, their most prized possession, their children. And so understanding that their education is really precious to them, and there is some fears that go along with IEPs and specialized education. And so offer assurance that you're there to do the best for their child, and that you're there to listen to their fears. Special education teacher talked about just really having open communication, being very transparent about the progress of the student so that they can see how what you're doing is effective for the student. And then he just mentioned, get them on the phone, get them over email, get them on anything. You've just got to have a lot of communication. The paraprofessional was a really interesting perspective. She mentioned that really the relationship is the biggest key to communicating with the parents, because as a paraprofessional, you're not always seen as an authority figure in the parents' eyes. And so if you have that relationship, that's where that gives you the best opportunity to really have those conversations with the parent and understand what you can do better for their child as well. When working with general education in terms of the special education students, the principal talked about how you've really got to help general education teachers to understand that all students are theirs. Oftentimes there's this idea that they're not as much on me because they have specialized education now. And that's a really negligent way to look at it. And so he wanted to make sure that everybody sees their students as theirs so that they can work as a team together for every student. And the special education teacher talked about how he would provide general education teachers with a snapshot of the students with IEPs and to kind of clarify, here's the modifications or accommodations and what that means. And so if a student maybe isn't required to obviously go to a separate setting for a test but has that option, he makes sure that he gives information in a concise and clear way for the general education teacher to know what the kind of the guide rails are there. And then the paraprofessional talked about how she just needs to know what her role is. She's not a guest in the room, but rather someone to be leveraged for better instruction. She actually talked about there's been negative times where she feels like she's there to staple papers or file things rather than truly be a driver for successful students. And so she talked about the general education teacher needs to be clear on what expectations he or she has of her and what a successful small group and one-on-one facilitation looks like. The advice for first-year admin, and I combine this really with their aspiring characteristics, what they want to see in administration. The principal says, pretty short on a lot of the answers. Said, ask lots of questions, and don't try to have every answer. Love your students and your staff. I really like this fourth one. Be in classrooms for 2 hours every day. It really shows that you have an instructional focus, and I think that that's extremely important. And then obviously keeping students the main thing and the focus of everything you do. The special education teacher talked about, again, just having that open communication with all staff. And then he said, in part of that, you should be finding out from staff what they need to be successful so that you can best support them. And the paraprofessional wanted to make clear, I'm going to need training. So a first-year administrator to a novice paraprofessional is going to need some training. And then keeping the expectations for those paraprofessionals clear and their role clear as a professional. So describing their role in terms of special education, the principal said, first and foremost, I am an instructional leader. And so there's sometimes the leaders who kind of take more of a manager perspective, and that's not as effective as truly being an instructional leader and making sure that you're seen as that in the building, getting in the classrooms, making sure that you're seeing effectiveness of instruction at all times. The special education teacher kind of said it simple. It's his role to stand in the gap for those students with specialized instruction. The paraprofessional talked about her role was really to build trust and confidence with whatever student she's working with that day and just foster success for that kiddo. So what I learned in terms of reflections, I really liked what the principal had to say in terms of just being truly an instructional leader and what that takes within your role with special education and out to your whole building. A focus on that instruction and keeping expectations clear across the board. And that was really for everybody. Everybody desired that from their principal, and everybody felt like if they got that, then they could do their best job. The evaluation of kind of what I heard from everybody, it seemed like that's exactly what I was just saying. There was a consistent goal from every level. The principal and the special education teacher and the para, they all want the same thing. And it's this authentic collaboration to truly do what's best for all kids. And really it's about collective efficacy, that we together are going to make a big difference for and impact the students' learning. And so based on all of this, it actually kind of takes me back to a book I've been reading, Michael Fullan's Coherence, and where he just talks about how as a school leader, you have to have a clear vision and help your building to understand their moral purpose and keep the main thing. And so focus on that student learning and make sure that's what's driving all your decisions you're making, and that you're supporting your staff in order and to create a culture of learning that will drive that forward, culture of learning and collaboration. So that's the end of my video. I appreciate you watching.